What's up guys, Agent here again with another build video. Today we're going to be going over the Magicka Dragonknight. Mag DKs are kind of one of those classes or one of those DPS specs that everybody wants to be very good. And they can do very good DPS compared to some other Magicka classes, but they're kind of in a unique spot in that Magicka Dragonknights usually will only play in melee range. Now there are some ranged Mag DK builds out there that I've seen, but those are becoming more and more rare these days, and a lot of Magicka DKs now are actually within melee range of the boss in order to do the DPS. Now that kind of makes a few problems here, in that a lot of the other ranged classes, except maybe the Magicka Templar, they all play at range. So you're not really competing with Magicka DPS anymore as a Mag DK. You're competing more with Stamina DPS, because Stamina DPS are usually in melee range. So because you're competing with Stamina DPS like Stamina Nightblades, Stamina Sorks, even your Stamina counterpart, you're kind of being held to a different standard here. Basically, you're being held to the standard of Stamina DPS, which kind of isn't really fair for Mag DK, because Magic DPS, as you guys all know, is generally a little bit lower than Stamina DPS. So that's kind of where the Mag DK falls right now. It's in this weird, awkward position where it's both the Magic DPS, but it's also being compared against Stamina DPS because of its melee position, really. That being said, Mag DKs are quite fun to play. Before I hooked onto the Warden, before the Warden was released, I really enjoyed playing Mag DK. They can still pull very good DPS. So don't let that discourage you. The whole being compared to Stamina Nightblade thing. That only really matters for the very high-end guilds. So for your typical progression style guild, for your casual raiding guild, it doesn't really matter all that bad. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, CPs, everything you need to know in order to make this build your own. I will be going over some gear substitution in instances where I believe it is appropriate, and kind of explaining which scenarios you would be actually swapping out this gear. That's basically it. So let's go ahead and get started with this build, starting off with our gear here. So our monster helm set is Zaan. So because we're in melee range the entire time, this is a melee build. Like I said earlier, Mag DKs are pretty much always melee. Zaan is going to be the strongest monster helm in the game for you. There's just really no good alternatives to Zaan when you're talking about single target DPS. Now, there is perhaps one other monster helm that might be good for you to consider using, and that's going to be Grothdarr. Grothdarr is not only easier to obtain, but it also has some cleave damage associated with it, because it is a AoE that spawns on top of you rather than a beam that hits only one enemy. So if you are clearing trash, for instance, or you're against a boss that might have a lot of ads that you might want to cleave, Grothdarr might actually be a good choice. You will lose some single target DPS. Grothdarr is not quite as strong as Zaan, but you will gain a considerable amount of AoE DPS as well. That's kind of the trade-off that you're making there. You can see here that I do have one health enchant. That's because we are using Witchmother's Potent Brew in order to help ourselves sustain. Mag DKs did see a slight nerf to sustain with combustion. It used to proc off of, I think it procs off of burning now. So this is the effect here, burning, combustion. So when you apply burning, you restore 500 magicka, and it can occur once every 5 seconds. Where is it? There was something here that was nerfed. It was kind of a very small nerf. You won't really notice it in PvE. So that kind of happened in Wolfhunter. I think it was direct damage for snares. So again, it doesn't really matter too much for PvE, but it is a small nerf for Mag DKs in PvP. So that's that. But Mag DKs do have some sustain issues, so we do need to use Witchmothers and not Blue Food in order to help ourselves sustain. We are going 5-1-1, so the body pieces that we're going to be wearing are all light armor sets, so that means that we will need to have our heavy and medium pieces be on our monster helm set. So we have medium shoulders and heavy head here. The exception to this is if you're using Julianos, but you don't really want to use Julianos on a Mag DK, and I'll explain a little bit more on that a little bit later. So for our first body set, this is a set that's going to be active on both bars. It's going to be Siroria. No surprise there. Siroria is still the strongest set in the game right now for Magicka DPS, as long as you're able to maintain very good stacks. If you're not able to maintain very good stacks, then Siroria does start to lose a little bit of power there. As the perfect version here, you can go with the imperfect version. The difference is that additional Max Magicka boost from the 5-piece effect. The imperfect version does not have the additional Max Magicka, so it's a pretty small difference overall. If you aren't able to clear Cloud Rest +1 or higher, then you can just stick with normal Siroria. Now, like I mentioned, Siroria is only strong if you're able to maintain very good stacks uptime. So if you're not able to maintain good stack uptime, so for example, if you're in Asylum or Cloud Rest where you're moving around a lot, then Siroria is not going to be the best option for you. You might want to run a different set instead. So there's a couple of sets that you could run on the body piece, on the body instead of Siroria if you don't want to use Siroria, or if it's a fight that you don't think Siroria can be utilized in. The first set is going to be Burning Spellweave. Burning Spellweave is actually our second 5-piece set, our front bar set here. But if you can't use Siroria, then Burning Spellweave is perfectly fine as a replacement for Siroria. The second set I'm going to recommend is going to be Mother's Sorrow. Even though Mag Decays don't have additional crit damage like Templars or Nightblades, Mother's Sorrow is still pretty strong on Magicka DPS, even though we don't have as high a crit modifier as Templars or Nightblades. The third set that I recommend is going to be Silks of the Sun. So this is an overland set, so you can purchase it off of Guild Traders. If you want to farm it, it comes from Stonefalls. The thing with Silks of the Sun is because all of our damage is fire damage, that 5-piece, the additional 400 spell damage onto our flame damage abilities. Let me see if I can find it really quick. Nope, I need to grab it. But the 400 additional fire damage is going to be very, very strong because all of our damage is basically fire damage, except for maybe a handful of things. Now, the downside of running Silks of the Sun is that you do lose basically one set bonus. You're trading it out. So it's a max health bonus here on the 2-piece. So that does have its advantages in that you're able to run all magic enchants, so you don't need that health enchant on Zaan anymore. But the downside is you are losing out on one set bonus. So you're losing out on some spell damage or maybe even spell crit if you're using Silks of the Sun. So that's kind of the downside of running Silks of the Sun. But again, you can kind of think, because you're able to swap out that health enchant for a Magicka enchant, you can kind of think of the 2-piece set as a slightly weaker Max Magicka set bonus. So you can think of Silks of the Sun as like Max Magicka spell damage for set bonuses that way, if you kind of want to think of it like that. The last set that I recommend is going to be Julianos, and that's a crafted set, and that's still very, very good for kind of beginner Magicka DPS if you're just starting to farm your gear. It is not going to be quite as strong as Silks of the Sun, even though Silks of the Sun does have that health set bonus. Julianos, the 5-set bonus, is considerably weaker. It's 299 compared to 400, so you will notice a little bit of a difference there. But Julianos is still a very good choice. It's not that much weaker than Silks of the Sun, so it's kind of up to you if you want to buy Silks of the Sun or if you want to just craft Julianos instead. So for our front bar sets, we are using Burning Spellweave here. You'll notice I do have a Magicka regen. That's just to help our sustain again, because Mag Decays do have fairly poor sustain overall. So that's going to be our front bar set. So it's going to be 3 body pieces. In this case, I have 3 jewelry pieces and then our front bars. So for our traits here, you'll notice that we're doing all divines. You can go with Infused on the large pieces if you're using a Max Magicka enchant. So for example, I wouldn't use Infused here on the head because it's a health enchant, but if it was a Magicka enchant, I could use Infused. Infused is a little bit stronger mathematically. It's about 0.1 or something like that, 0.2% stronger than Divine, so it's not really worth it in my opinion if you manage to get the Divine drop to transmute Infused. But if you really, really want to push out that last bit of DPS, then you should go with Infused on your large pieces. You have all Magicka enchants except for that 1 health if you're not using Silks of the Sun. For our enchants on our jewelry, we have 1 regen for the sustain, like I mentioned earlier, and then 2 spell damage glyphs. I have 2 arcane and 1 bloodthirsty here. So unlike with some other classes that have executes, so Sorks, Nightblades, Templars, bloodthirsty is not quite as strong on Mag Decay just because they don't really have dedicated execute ability. It's kind of the same deal with wardens. Wardens while the bear is technically an execute, it's an ultimate, so Bloodthirsty still has some use there on wardens there. Assuming that that Bloodthirsty works with the bear, there have been kind of conflicting reports whether the Bloodthirsty affects the bear or not. So here we have 1 Bloodthirsty and 2 Arcane. You could go with 3 Bloodthirsty. It is still not a bad choice. You can go 3 Bloodthirsty, 3 Arcane, or any combination in between. So it's kind of up to you which one you want to do. For our front bar, it's going to be an Inferno staff. We are doing double Inferno because Magickas get a lot of additional bonuses onto flame damage, specifically burning. So we have an infused weapon damage enchant on our front bar here with burning Spellweave Inferno. Then our back bar is an infused Maelstrom Inferno with a flame damage enchant. Because of the way back bar enchants work now, Blockade on our back bar will proc flame damage even when we swap to our front bar. And it will remember if it's infused or not. So that's why it's infused, so we have that stronger enchant there. Alright, so for our front bar sets, if you don't have Burning Spellweave, because you do need to farm Burning Spellweave from City of Ash, there are, again, a few options here. You can go with Mother's Sorrow, that's still a decent front bar set there, and you can also use something like Zaan or Julianos, those just aren't going to be quite as strong. You can go with Moondancer if you really want to, just because Moondancer does have the additional regen prop, which is actually quite helpful on a Magicka, but you are kind of at the mercy of the RNG gods if you're using Moondancers. So that's something that you want to take into consideration there. So if you can, try to farm out that Burning Spellweave Inferno, but if not, you can probably go with something like Mother's Sorrow, Silks of the Sun, or Julianos if you would like. And again, Moondancer is not a bad choice, but it is sort of a weaker choice, partly because of RNG, but also because you're doubling up on Minor Slayer, which of course doesn't stack because it's a named buff. Now for our character sheet here is just kind of just general information about the race and things like that. So we are a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are by far the strongest race because they get 7% additional flame damage. So the other Magicka races, the High Elves, the Altmer, the Bretons, and even the Argonians, they don't really come quite at the same level as Dark Elves with Dragonites. Dragonites are probably the only class that I would say like that Dark Elves are definitively the best. It's not like you can pick and choose, but like High Elves and Bretons are still fine choices. You can still do very good DPS on them, but Dark Elves are definitely more noticeable compared to the difference between Dark Elves and High Elves on a Dragonite is more noticeable than a difference between a Dark Elf and a High Elf on a Nightblade, for example. So definitely try to pick a Dark Elf if you can. If you want to do a High Elf, if you want to do Bretons, by all means go ahead and do so. They still are very good DPS. They both get 10% max Magicka, and High Elves still get 4% additional flame damage. So they still get a little bit of a buff there. But Dunmer, the Dark Elves are definitely the strongest when it comes to Dragonite DPS. For our attributes, we have 64 points into Magicka. Because we do have access to shields as a Magicka DPS, we can run a little bit lower health. So we're sitting at 16.3k with Witch Mothers. If you want to put a little bit more points into health to give yourself a little bit more survivability, by all means, you can certainly do so by shifting some points from Magicka into health. My personal recommendation would be to put no more than 10 points into health, because at that point you're kind of giving up a little bit too much max Magicka, giving up a little bit too much DPS in exchange for survivability. For our Mundus, I have the Thief here, but you can go with the Apprentice if you would like. With the shift to the Infused Weapon Damage enchant going on our front bar, the Apprentice and the Thief, that gap is closed a little bit. So they're both very, very close to each other. The Apprentice and the Thief winning, kind of swapping back and forth depending on your specific gear setup and buff uptimes. So you can just pick either one of them, and you can just stick with that. Definitely, you have options there when it comes to your Mundus. And for food, Witch Mother's Potent Brew for the additional regen, you can go with Clockwork Stitches Fillet if you can afford it. It is basically a slightly upgraded version of Witch Mother's. But it does use Perfect Rogue to create, so it is kind of expensive to use. So it's about 2k, I think, right now on PCNA for one Clockwork Citrus Fillet. So that is an option there, but don't feel like you have to use it if you don't think you can afford it over long periods of time. Witch Mothers is perfectly fine to use. It'll get you through all the content in the game. We're talking about our skills, starting off with our front bar here. Our first ability is going to be Molten Whip. This is going to be our main spam bull. Then we have Burning Embers, Engulfing Flame, this is where our shield would be, so instead of Elemental Drain here, you'd be using Dampened Magic or Harness Magicka. Choice is up to you which one you want to make, which one you want to choose. And we have Inner Light, and then we have Fiery Rage Dexter Staff ulti. This is here mainly because of the Ancient Knowledge passive. We will really be using our backbar ultimate Dragonknight Standard instead. So you can use this if you need the additional cleave, just because it lasts for a shorter period of time, so it deals more damage in a shorter period of time than the Dragonknight Standard will, because Dragonknight Standard doesn't tick quite as hard. It just lasts for a longer period of time. So if you need a lot of damage very quickly, then by all means use the Dexter ulti, but usually you'll be sticking to Standard instead, because Standard does have some that 15% additional damage buff and damage taken debuff that's really helpful as a DK. For our back bar, we have Flames of Oblivion, Eruption, Blockade of Fire, Rearming Trap. We are in melee range, so we don't have to use Challenge Acceleration if we don't want to. Rearming Trap is going to be a little bit better for sustain because it uses our secondary resource rather than our primary resource. Then I have Balance here, but you can go with the other morph, which is Spell Symmetry if you would like. This is mainly here for additional sustain. You don't necessarily have to use Balance, but because Burning Embers does have a nice heal when you reapply it, it kind of offsets that health loss a little bit there with Balance. It also gives you Major Ward, Major Resolve, which is nice, but Spell Sim will give you a little bit better sustain after you use it, because it does reduce the cost of your next Magicka ability. It's kind of up to you which one you want to use. Now, in a very good organized group with Orb Support and Worm, you actually don't need to use Balance or Spell Sim. You can instead replace this with Inner Light instead, but that's only with a organized group that's able to really help you support your sustain overall. Alright, and then our ultimate is obviously Triple Standard of Might, so this is going to be our primary ultimate here. There is kind of a downside of running this, and that is that on mobile fights, with the boss moving around a lot, if you drop your standard at the wrong moment, you basically wasted your ultimate. So you kind of have to be a little bit careful when you decide to use Standard of Might, and that's also where the Dexter Staff ulti comes into play here, because if you're on a mobile boss, because the Dexter Staff ulti lasts for only 7 seconds compared to 17 seconds standard, you're able to get larger hits off on the boss in a shorter period of time. So it deals almost 10k damage per tick per every second for 7 seconds. So that's obviously stronger than the 3k damage every 1 second for 17 seconds. But when you can, definitely use Standard of Might because of that 15% additional damage done, as well as 15% damage reduction while you're within the standards radius. So that's really, really nice there. Okay, I have passed my chrono background check. Thank you. I don't know if you guys saw that or not. Okay, so moving on here to our CP points. For our green CPs, so the CP cap is 780, which gives us 260 points for each of the 3 different constellation colors. So with the Lover, this is green CPs, we have 75 Arcanist, 75 Tenacity, that leaves 110 points, which you can put into the remaining nodes really however you'd like. It really depends on if you want to kind of focus in more on PvP or you want to go for a more PvE-centric outlook. You can even put Arcanist and our Tenacity all the way up to 100 if you'd like, get that extra 1%, and then put the remaining 60 points wherever you'd like. So I have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, and 30 Warlord. For our blue CPs, I do want to mention here that this particular CP setup is optimized around having Alkosh in the group and as well as Infused Crusher. So if you don't have Alkosh in the group, or you don't have very good uptime on Alkosh, or you don't have very good uptime on Crusher, you might need to shift a couple of points into Spell Erosion to kind of make up for that lower uptimes. So I do have 9 points on a Staff Expert here, so obviously these would be what you would want to move first, these 9 points into Spell Erosion. And then from there, you can take 5 points out of Elfborn, drop it to 61 if you need, 5 points from Mastered Arms to get another 5 points if you need. And so that's about 19 more points there for you to use in Spell Erosion. Now, one thing I do want to mention here is that if you don't have Alkosh in the group, you can actually go with the Lover instead to make up for that loss of penetration, and then you can take all your points out of Spell Erosion, or I should say most of your points out of Spell Erosion, because with the Lover you'll actually be pretty close to the penetration cap if you have the other debuffs in the group. So that's something you also want to take into consideration there. So your blue CPs might vary a little bit depending on your specific group. So for here, I have 66 Elfborn, 64 Ellie Expert, 18 Spell Erosion, 9 Staff Expert, 66 Master at Arms, and 37 into Thaumaturge. We do have several dots, so we have a little bit more points in the Thaumaturge compared to, say, a Magicka Nightblade. Now for a red CPs, this particular setup is kind of a more balanced approach, so it is decent mitigation for all the trials in the game, but it's not necessarily optimized for any one specific trial. So if you do want to optimize your mitigation for a single trial, you will need to shift some points around. So we have 66 into Ironclad, 56 into Thick-Skinned, 64 into both Hardy and Almost Defender. Now that gives us 10 remaining points, which we will put into Bastion here for the field position passive. This passive is more useful for progression groups than like score running groups, just because score running groups typically will reset if somebody dies. But in progression style groups, you will be resurrecting throughout fights usually, so it's really nice to have this additional damage mitigation while you're resurrecting somebody. This does also affect the damage your shield takes, so it just gives you a little bit more breathing space when you're resurrecting somebody in case you get damaged. Alright, so that's pretty much all of our build information. Let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. Our rotation is a little bit dynamic, so the durations of each of our dots last for a different period of time, so it's going to be a little bit dynamic here and there. It'll start off being fairly static, and then as the offsets become more and more, you'll find that it's going to be a little bit more dynamic overall. So for example, Blockade is 8 seconds, Flames of Oblivion is 15, Eruption is 18, Burning Embers is 10, Engulfing Flames is 10. So you kind of have to play around a little bit with your abilities. You can kind of shift abilities around if you absolutely need to make your rotation a little bit cleaner. But you will eventually have enough of an offset here that you will basically be running a little bit of a dynamic rotation here. You want to include Trap too. Trap is technically it is a 10.5 second duration because you do have that 1.5 seconds for the trap to arm. So it's 2 6-second durations. So you have to take away that 1.5 from the end in order to kind of maintain 100% uptime. And so you have 10.5 second duration for Rearming Trap. So a lot of offsets here. But generally what you want to do is just basically want to keep your dots up on the back bar. Obviously, Blockade, very, very important to keep up, but also Rearming Trap for that minor force bonus. And then on the front bar here, Engulfing Flames is going to be the most important ability to maintain for that 10% additional fire damage debuff. So this is very, very unique. This is to the Magicka DK. This is why DK tanks are very strong, because of that additional Engulfing Flames, that additional 10% flame damage debuff. If you have a Mag Decay, then tanks don't need to run it anymore. So that's kind of one very important skill that you want to maintain 100% uptime on. And from there, just basically spam your whip. So basically, you're just going to maintain your dots. Then when your dots run out on your back bar, you just swap to that bar and reapply them. And that's basically it. It is going to be more dynamic, as you can see here, when your ability offsets become greater and greater. So one thing that I will mention here is when do you want to use your standard. So I recommend using your standard when all your dots are up. Because it increases the amount of damage that you deal, you do kind of want to have your dots ticking already when you put down the standard, so that way you make the most out of that first couple of seconds of standards. That way you're not waiting for your dots to start ticking, because then you're wasting that additional standard time there. One other thing I do want to mention here is the way that Action Duration Reminder works. So I am using Action Duration Reminder, and it's a little bit weird with Burning Embers in that it will also count the cooldown of combustion, the combustion passive, on the Burning Embers icon. So generally speaking, what I normally do is when I apply Engulfing Flames, when I reapply it, I also reapply Burning Embers because they share the 10-second cooldown. Alright, so let's go ahead and do a 6-minute enemy part so you guys can get an idea of the kind of DPS you can see, or at least give you some sort of metric that you can compare to other DPS specs. So do keep in mind here that because we are in melee DPS, we are kind of comparing a more accurate comparison. It's not necessarily to other Magicka DPS who might be playing at range, but stamina DPS, because you will be taking the spot of a stamina DPS, not one of the range DPS. So that's something that I do want to point out here when we go over this sort of rotation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So like I mentioned before, I use my standard. I want to drop all my backbar dots. Just that way I'm not basically wasting that standard uptime. Now, because Magickas don't have very good sustain, you do want to be a little bit careful to not over-apply your dots, which is basically recasting them before they run out. This is particularly important for Eruption, because Eruption is actually fairly expensive. You can see here just the level of sustain we're sitting at. So you can swap cancel out of the bounce animation, like so. So again, we do want to have dots running before dropping our standard, just to make most use out of that standard uptime. Alright, so there we go. That is what you can expect from a Magic DK. It's actually a little bit lower than what I normally pull here. So let's see if I can pull it up. So this is what I pulled most recently, around 43.5. This time I pulled only 42.3. There was a little bit of weirdness going on with my weaving. I'm sure you guys saw the kind of animations that are going on there. But light attacks, again, pretty important to light weave very well in order to get, because they do a lot of damage here. Molten Whip is pretty strong overall. But Blockade is important to maintain just because it will proc your back bar flame damage enchant, which does quite a bit of damage here. You can see here it is number 5 in DPS contribution here. Now, with if you're using Burning Spellweave, Burning is going to be up here as well. But if you're not using Burning Spellweave, it'll be a little bit closer to around here-ish. So that's why Burning is up here. And with Burning Spellweave, we have pretty good uptime on Burning. We have 88% uptime on Burning here. So you can see pretty much that everything is just all fire damage. This is all fire damage, which is why Silks of the Sun is a little bit stronger than Juliana's because it buffs pretty much 100% of our damage except for this little bit here, which is Rearming Trap. So that's kind of why, even though Burning Silks of the Sun has that 1 health set bonus, still ends up beating Juliana's because of all this flame damage that it's buffing. So you pretty much get the full effect of that 5-piece, which puts it, 100 additional spell damage ahead of Juliana's, which is almost an entire set effect above Juliana's. If you take away the health set bonus. And you can see here that we have 67% uptime on weapon damage enchant. You can get higher. I've gotten up to, let me see here, this one was 70 something, 73%, so that could be a little bit better on the weapon damage enchant. But again, this is sort of a dynamic rotation, so you should be able to get higher than this. I think this was just one of those bad parses today. Alright, so that is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions about mag decays or dragon knights in general, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability, and if I don't know the answer, I'll try to find somebody who can answer it and kind of relay that back to you guys here. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.